Hello, my name is Juwon Ogungbe. I'm a composer and a singer based in London, of Nigerian heritage but born in Britain. And my music is eclectic, and I am about to launch a new EP, which is called Pilgrimage. And Pilgrimage is available on my Bandcamp page, which is at juwonogungbe.bandcamp.com, but also on all the major streaming platforms. And so that's what I'm here to talk about with you today.
So, Juwon, it's nice to hear you play. Now, my question is that when we see an African musician playing different music from the out setting, you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. Should I describe you as an African musician or a musician an African musician who plays all sorts of music, including classical music, as you do?
I think maybe the second description is more like it. A musician who happens to be of African heritage, yes, is what I would say. Because in my work, depending on what I'm supposed to be doing at any given point in time, the work varies, and the types of music that I have to play, learn, play, perform, varies according to circumstances and events. Yes.
So how do you deal with labels? You know what I mean by label? We as African musicians, mm-hmm. People all of a sudden when we mention the word I'm a musician, they expect you to play African music. So how do you deal with that?
Well, it was a bit of an issue for me when I was a lot younger, because in those days, I can't say that I was initially inspired to play music by music from Africa. I wasn't born in Africa for a start. But then when I did live in Africa, of course, I came across a lot of African music, and some of that music inspired me. But I would say that I have always maintained, I guess, a sort of detached perspective about how I can express my musicianship or musical ability, skills, talent regardless of the genre or whatever it is. Obviously, I can't play every single genre there is, but as a musician, part of what I aim to do is be expressive in as wide a range as possible. And I have just stayed with that. That has remained my watchword or my North Star, as it were. Yes.
So then another question here is, you were inspired. You said you were inspired by either rhythms or music from Africa. Can you give us a little bit of names that are classically trained in Africa and who compose classical music? It could be from South Africa, Nigeria. So
Okay, well, in the sort of canon of African neoclassical music, there have been composers from, well, at least 100 years now. From Ghana, there was someone called Ephraim Amu, and then Fela Showande, who is regarded as, well, the father of African neoclassical music, who composed, symphonic pieces that were performed that are part of the repertoire of orchestras nowadays, internationally. And apart from Showande, there's a later generation that had people like Akinyuba, people like Nketia, Kwabena Nketia from Ghana, who passed away, I think, only about a year ago. There were people like Ayo Bankole, well-known composer. And then from East Africa, there are people like Justinian Tamuzuza. And there are South African composers too, who are, in some cases, holding down jobs as musicologists in major or leading universities, music departments of leading universities in, the United States and wherever. So there are quite a few out there, actually.
it's actually very interesting to hear you talk about these musicians. A musician like me, I feel almost embarrassed because I don't know them. I have never heard of them.
Well, there's a sad situation where there's a bit of a disconnect, I would say, a disconnect between the the communication of those musicians and the audiences, like African audiences. I think someone like me, I think I'm fortunate to be living in a time of social media. I think social media would have made a huge difference to a lot of those careers of those composers and performers. But because in those days there wasn't such a thing, it wasn't as easy for them to get their music heard and appreciated by as many people.
So now, when we look at, we are still having challenges. Your music, when you are composing your music, are you also imagining Africa? Because I could hear in the lyrics you're singing Africa Today, and the melodies are very good. Which language are you singing this piece?
That song is in Yoruba, which is like the language of my heritage. Yes.
Okay.
Well, it depends on the context because I do a lot of composing music for theatre or for, different types of performance. And there are times when I've composed songs in Swahili, for example, depending on the demands of the particular job at that point in time. But like my sort of default position, what I would do for myself would be mainly composing using the English language because that's the language I think in. When I dream in English. I don't dream in any African language. So that's the way it works. But then the words, the verbal side of making music is not the same as that of like hearing melodies, hearing rhythms, and all of that. So in that side of things, then other influences enter the equation, come into the mix.
Good. So you know what? We are here to hear you speak, and also play a little bit of music. Could you play us another short piece?
Yes. Now this one is called Olumo, which means the purveyor of the sweetest honey. And it was like from a show that I was involved in developing, inspired by a novel called The Palm Wine Drinkard by someone called Amos Tutuola. But then the show that we developed was called Threshold. So this is it. A palm wine tapper is pining for his wife who has departed to the spirit world. Oloyinmomo. Oloyinmomo mi, padà wá kó súnmọ́ mi, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oloyinmomo mi, padà wá kó súnmọ́ mi, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oloyinmomo mi, padà wá kó súnmọ́ mi, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oloyinmomo mi, padà wá kó súnmọ́ mi, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la. Oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, oyin, oyin Oloyinmomo, dúró tì mí o nínú òtútù ní ọ̀la.
Fantastic. Now, let us talk about your launch. Then I will go into another question which you might help us. Talk about the music that you're going to launch here. How long did the project take you? All that, and also, does this project involve you on the piano, or there's a collaboration somewhere in between?
Okay, the project is called Pilgrimage. It's about an imagined journey for someone like myself, somebody who lives outside of Africa, sort of making a journey to a place that is inspired by Abeokuta. Abeokuta is a city in southwestern Nigeria. It is a place where the Anglican missionaries first settled in the Victorian era, and from there they kind of like spread through what became Nigeria, because Nigeria as a nation formed in 1914, and this was long before that when they settled there. The music, there's 5 songs on the EP, and it took me probably about a month, I think, to create them, and all of it is performed by me. So there wasn't any kind of involvement of any other performers on that recording. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, one challenge that we have, how do we create awareness of African musicians who are playing classical music? Does it mean that our fellow Africans have to go out there and buy and see you guys perform in theaters, or what is the strategy here? Could we apply?
Well, to use a sort of a bit of a corny phrase, it takes two to tango, and I think it needs to come from both sides. I mean, like, I think the artists, the musicians, performers, composers, others need to reach out as much as possible to people that might not know as much about this genre or subgenre within art or classical music as they know about others. But then on the other side of it is that the audiences, I think, well, in some cases, people are set in their ways. People like what they like. I mean, I know that even for me, when I'm at home, it's not like I always listen I go looking for new music to listen to. I listen to things that make me feel comfortable, that put me in my comfort zone. So I understand that people tend to gravitate toward the things that that they remember, that they feel nostalgic about, or that sort of press particular buttons for them. But I also feel that there is that space in between. There are what we call dedicated arts followers. It won't be every single person that's going to go out and go searching or go looking, be curious, inquisitive about new types of music or music that they hadn't heard about before. But there will be some people who are interested, people who do want to know. And the main thing is about trying to encourage that sort of coming together of the people who want to know with the people who have the music to present. And that is something that, I think must try harder is what I would say. We all need to try harder.
So now, that's very interesting. You're always presenting your answers in academic ways. So, what do you think? Okay, should I say, is Africa now in a good place to embrace more classical music? And if there is any challenge, we know there are challenges there. What advice would you give, like, to young musicians who wants to play classical music? And of course, in many parts of Africa, they don't even have instruments. Maybe some of them could get some instruments from Europe. What kind of advice would you give?
Well, art music doesn't have to be created on only standard orchestral instruments. There were like American composers, like there's a guy called Harry Parch who used to make his own instruments, do his own types of tuning for instruments. We can make our own instruments, our own sounds, and still make music that one could describe as art music. So I don't think everybody needs to, parrot fashion, sort of imitate or simulate the European or Western classical model before they're creating music that is eloquent or, that symbolizes lofty ideas or high emotions or whatever it is. I think all of those things can be done with talking drums or sort of with like lyres or nyatiti or whichever instruments can be used to create those types of music. And I know that, for example, the guy Justinian Tamasuza from Uganda, I think he composes for African instruments, and he does what they call tempering the Western instruments to make them sound more like African instruments. So there are lots of possibilities there. Like, it's a bit like a painter, like a visual artist. Yes, you start with paint that might have been made somewhere different from where you are, but what you actually do with that paint on that canvas or whatever the surface is up to you, is what you do with it that makes it what it becomes. So I think there are a lot more young people in Africa now aiming to play violins and various orchestral instruments. There's a lot more of that than when I was a young person, for sure, which is, it's a healthy development. And I suppose they need to go through a process of learning, the basics of playing those instruments well. So they play the Western canon. They play pieces that were written by Western composers, white composers, in order to sort of get to that stage where they are eloquent enough as performers on those instruments or as singers or whatever it is. But I think there also needs to be that sort of movement, tendency to encourage people to really be themselves and create and perform and interpret as themselves in with such a genre of music.
You actually, I'm using the term classical music, but you are actually describing it as art music.
Yes.
So what is the difference?
Well, all of the music, all of that type of music, which is basically music of the courts and maybe the churches or temples, originally for, say, Europeans that traveled across the world, eventually became described as art music. So within all of that art music, there was a particular era that was described as the classical era, which was the era of the likes of Mozart, Haydn, maybe Beethoven was at the beginning of the Romantic era. So there's all those different eras within this art music genre, but people tend to describe it as classical music, the same way as they might describe ballet as classical dance, or you might describe Shakespeare as classical theatre. Yeah. So, but I prefer to call it art music because I don't necessarily want to always have the hang-ups of like, I've got to do it this way because that's what so-called classical musicians do, or London Sinfonietta did this, or a singer from Royal Opera House did that. I can do exactly what I choose to do, with my training, with my kind of level of eloquence and the ideas that I might have to express, and be free in that expression.
Thank you very much, Juwon. We are going to the end of our interview. Can you play us out?
Okay, sure. So this last song is called Muwari, which means I've been searching for good fortune. And just to remind you, my EP is called Pilgrimage. It's going to be launched on Twitter Spaces on the 25th of June at 6 p.m. So on Twitter Spaces, 25th of June, 6 p.m. I have a special guest, Professor Patika Ntuli, who'll be tuning in from South Africa. Now, this tune is called Muwari. Papa mireti, mireti, Papa mireti, mireti, mire fa mireti, mireti. Papa mireti, mireti, Papa mireti, mireti, mire fa mireti, mireti. Muwari, morire, Muwari, morire, ile ayo mia, lodo mia, morire. Muwari, morire, Madolorire, il y a yo mi sheshabere, Madolorire, 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 il y a yo mi sheshabere, Madolorire, 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 il y a yo mi sheshabere.